Welcome! In this video I'm going to show you how to make silver stacking rings. So now we're going to start making our own silver stacking ring. So I've got some beaded wire here and I'm using quite a thin one, 1.5 millimeters. You can use any size that you like, but this is going to make a nice fine stacking bangle. And the first thing I want to do is measure up my size. So I'm going to take some ring sizes, and you can get these in metal or in plastic. And I'm just going to place it onto my ring finger that I want to make the ring for and make sure that it's a nice comfy fit. So you might need to try a few on until you find the one that works best for you. Then I'm just going to pop that onto my mandrel and see where it comes up. So that is size R. So if you are based in a different country, you might have different ring sizing sticks. Whatever the letter or number that it's on, that's where we want to make our ring to. So we make sure we get it the right size. So next up, I'm going to take my wire, I'm just going to stretch it out a little, and I'm going to find my marker, my R, and I'm just going to push it around. Now, because this is quite a fine wire, it's quite easy for me to do with my fingers, but if you struggle with it, if you're using a thicker piece, you might want to use your D-shaped pliers to just go in there and give it a little twist. So I can try it on my finger at this stage and check that it fits. It's a little bit big still, so I can pull it tight, pop it back on my mandrel. And just play around with it a bit until I get a really nice size that I'm happy with. Because next up we're going to saw or cut the shape. And I want to make sure that it's the right size. Great, so that's a nice comfy fit. I'm happy with that. Now I want to get a section where the wires cross over, and I'm going to saw straight through them. That will give me a really nice circle. So when you're working with beaded wire, it's quite easy to saw because obviously you've got little grooves where you can saw in, but if you're working with plain wire, this is a really nice way to get a nice strong join down the middle. So I'm going to get my saw blade ready. This is my saw frame. You can use any jeweler's saw frame. I'm just going to take the blade out so I can show you how to put a blade in, because this is one of the tricky bits actually. So when you get blades, they come and they have an up and a down. So you want to make sure that it's facing the right way. So I'm just going to rub my finger over, and that's how I know that it's facing the right way. So to attach my saw blade, I put the bottom part in and just tighten it. And then I don't just want to put the top part in and tighten it. Before I do that, I want to put pressure on the blade to make it a really tight joint. So if I just tighten it there, so you can hear slightly high pitched, but if I want it a little bit tighter, because I want it even more high pitched, I'm just going to push on the blade. So hopefully you can see with the saw, when I push on the blade, it goes a bit slacks. So I'm just going to loosen that, push and tighten. And the higher the pitch the sound, the tighter the blade. So that's a nice blade ready to be used. Next, I'm going to bring my ring over to the bench, place it kind of somewhere comfortable where I feel like I can hold it nicely, and I'm going to go straight down and saw through both at the same time. Just be really careful when you're sawing to keep your fingers out of the way, because it is a very sharp blade. And when I saw with a jeweler's saw, I want to go up and down, but I don't want to go angled at all. And I just want to not put too much pressure on and just let the saw do all the work. So actually with this one it's so thin, once I've got part way through I can just bend it and it'll come off. And the same with the other side. If you're using a thicker beaded wire, you just saw all the way through till you get to the end. Great, so now I've got my basic shape. I want to file my two ends where I've just sawed to make sure I've got a really nice, clean, flush end, and then we're going to solder it. So I'm taking my hand file. This is a cut to D-shaped file, but I'm only going to use the flat side, so you could use a flat file. And when you're filing, always support your work on the bench and make sure that you go in upward strokes. So I don't need to go backwards and forwards like that. Just nice, clean upward strokes will give you a nice, controlled file on your piece. And it won't take much to give a nice flat join. Great, then I'm ready to join the pieces together, and I'm just using my fingers, and I might use my D-shaped plier as well. To just get a really nice join before I solder it, because with solder it will join the metal together but it won't fill any gaps, so I want to make sure that there's no gap there. Then finally, just so that I know where the points are, I'm going to use a pen just to mark the two sides with a bit of black, so I know the two that I need to solder together. And then I'm going to pop it on the solder block and start soldering. Great, so this is my heat-proof block, which I'm going to solder onto. I'm also going to use some flux, so I'm just going to dip my borax cone into some water a couple of times just to give a little bit of water into my flux. I'm just going to mix that round. So once I've mixed that in with a little bit of water, it will give a kind of milky white liquid, which is my flux, which I'm going to apply onto my piece with my brush. So I'm going to do that in a minute. First, I'm going to cut some solder. So this is my solder strip, and I'm using hard solder. Solder comes in hard, medium, and easy, but most of the time I use hard. So this is a hard solder. And I've got tin snips, which I'm going to use to cut pieces off. So I'm just going to cut some lengths down, just about 1/2 centimetre or so. I'm going to do a bunch of them. And then I can cut across with them. So I always cut down into my mat to make sure they don't go flying off. And I'm only going to need one piece for this project, so I've just got a small piece. Great, so now I'm going to get some flux on my brush, apply it onto my ring where the join is. This flux is really important to make sure that the solder is going to flow. If I don't have this, it's not going to work, so it's a really important ingredient. Then I'm just going to use my brush to pick up my solder, or you could use tweezers if you prefer. Place that down next to my ring. And then what I'm going to do is just use my fingers to place the join on top of the solder. Great, so now I'm ready to use my torch. To turn my torch on, I'm just going to twist the top for the gas, flick the switch, and just to turn it off, I'm just going to twist it that way. So make sure you know how to use the torch before we start. And also make sure, just in terms of health and safety, your hair's tied back, that there's no loose bits of paper or anything around that is flammable. If you've used your lighter fluid to fill up your torch, make sure that's well out of the way, just so we're being really safe while we're making our jewellery. And of course, remember it's a flame, so just be respectful of that and only point it at the heat-proof brick and nowhere else. Brilliant, so we're going to turn it back on, flick the switch, and I'm going to come over to my ring and just start by heating the whole piece gently. You might see the flux start to bubble, that's normal, it'll die down, and it's quite a thin piece, so it might happen quite quick. I'm just going to heat the whole ring evenly towards the back. There we go, and the solder's flown. And I can take my torch off straight away and turn it off. Remember that the end of the torch is going to be hot, so do not touch that for a while. And there we have our soldered ring. Next up, I'm going to pop it in the pickle. Pickle is a mild acid solution, so I recommend using safety pickle at home. You combine it with some water, you'll see instructions on the front of the pack, and I'm just going to put that in there for a couple of minutes to get rid of that kind of dark area where I've soldered. So I'll go and do that now. So now I've taken my piece out of the pickle and you'll see it's a kind of frosted white colour, and what I want to do next is just file away at the area where I've just done my solder joint to make it look like all the other bits. So we want to make it so we can't really tell which part has been soldered. So find your solder joint, and I'm going to get a needle file and just supporting my work, just going to go in there and give it a little file. It won't need much, so take your time. And I've got a needle file, I'm using a D shape, so it's got a kind of edge on it, which helps me to create the shape that I'm looking for. Use your bench peg as support. And again, always filing in one direction forwards. Gives you the most control over what you're doing. Great, so once I'm happy that I have done my filing, I can now start to polish my piece. You also might need to shape it. This one's still looking quite round, but it's a little bit disshapen. So I'm just gonna pop it onto my mandrel and using my mallet, I'm just gonna tap all the way around to give it a nice round shape. Like to tap it down a bit as well. That helps to get the shape really nice. This is also out of interest how you make a ring bigger. So if you've got a ring that you want to make a bit bigger, you tap it down a mandrel. So I don't want to do that too much because I don't want to stretch it. And then it's really just all about polishing, and there are lots of different ways to polish silver jewellery. We have some videos exclusively on that. I'm just going to show you. I normally start with a brass brush. So this is just a brass bristle brush, if you can say that. It's a tongue twister. It's got some brass bristles on it and it just helps shine up the metal. So rub that over the piece and hopefully you can see that the side where I've rubbed is a little bit shinier. And this side is a little bit matte. So I'm just going to do that over the whole of the piece. Then after I've done that, the next stage would be, if you have a barrel polisher, now's a really good time to put it in the barrel polish. And one of the samples I have barrel polished, so you can see it's a little bit shinier than this one because it's gone in the barrel polish for a little bit of time. If you don't have a barrel polish, then you can polish it by hand. And I'm a big fan of these polishing papers. So they come in different grits in order. So it's green, grey, blue, pink, then a sky blue and a kind of cream at the end. So you essentially work your way through all of these rubbing your ring. So rub the ring each side. And also around the edges. And these are a bit finer than sandpaper, so they don't damage your work, they just give it a really nice shine. So what I would do is work my way through all of those. For speed, I'm just gonna skip through that bit for now, but that's something that you could go through. And then my final stage would be using my polishing cloth and Glanol, which is a metal polish. And I'm just gonna add a little squeeze of Glanol to my polishing cloth. And you can do this with any of your jewelry as well if you want to polish it up after you've cleaned it. And I'm just going to rub it onto the ring all the way around. Then using a clean bit of my polishing cloth, I'm just going to rub it off And this gives a really beautiful shine, especially if you've done all of your sanding and polishing first. And even if I use the barrel polish, I'll do this afterwards as well. Hopefully you can start to see some of that shine coming through. And of course I've made a beaded ring, but you can make square shaped rings. It's exactly the same process. You can make round ones, oval ones, D-shaped. It's all the same. Wonderful. And there you have your beaded stacking ring. And we can have a look at some of the samples from before as well to give you ideas. So this is the same. I've just then soldered the bezel on. This is a thicker one which has been polished up a bit more. And the classic kind of standard round wire ring. So have fun making your pieces. It's a really nice project to be able to do. It really makes your jewellery open up, and you can obviously solder whatever elements you want onto the front to make your own collections and designs. Next up, I'm going to show you how to make a silver bar necklace.